everyone, Merry Christmas. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas day with your family, with your friends, at church, wherever you were to celebrate it. Today for the Candice Malcolm Show, we are doing a very special episode where we're doing a extended version of Ask Me Anything. We're not going to talk about any news. We're just going to go through the mailbag and answer all of the questions. If you'd like to have a question answered in a future episode or future podcast, you have to be a club member in order to get a question asked. So you can head on over to tnc.news, sign up as a club member, and then you can submit your questions and I will read them on air in a future show. So let's jump right into it. First question. Hi Candice, Merry Christmas to you, your family, and the True North family. I've been seeing some media exposure on the minister's mandate letters purportedly prepared by Trudeau to give the tasks and directions for each minister to accomplish, from the Minister of Everything to the Minister of Nothing. Given the cranial capacity of PM Trudeau, it is not possible he had the acumen to produce these documents other than probably contributing his signature. Who really prepares these mandate letters and how are they vetted to suit the Liberals' agenda? Kindest regards, Gordon. Well, thank you so much for the question, Gordon. Yeah, of course, Justin Trudeau, I mean, he doesn't even do his own prime ministerial jobs anymore. That's why he appointed Chrystia Freeland to be his deputy. So we know that he's not really doing the day-to-day kind of business aspect of the prime minister. And so when it comes to these mandate letters, basically they are prepared by the PCO, by the Privy Council office, which is sort of the bureaucratic office that sits adjacent to the prime minister's office. The prime minister's office is full of the political staffers that are appointed by the Liberal government. And then the Privy Council is the permanent bureaucracy that is there. So the PCO creates these documents sort of as an outline based on the Liberal Party platform. They pass it over to the political side in the Prime Minister's office. The staffers who are appointed by Trudeau would go through and sort of change the wording, add certain things, and then those letters would go off to the minister themselves. So no, Justin Trudeau didn't sit down and create these. Although I will say that under the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, my understanding is that he was really big into these kind of memos, into producing these kind of documents, and that he would, if he received a memo, he would stay up, he would read every single thing that came across his desk, and that he had a larger part in crafting these kind of things. But as far as the Liberals and the bureaucracy, you know, the Liberals and the bureaucracy, they basically all agree and believe the same stuff. So it's easier for the Liberals because they can have the bureaucrats do part of their job. Okay, next question. Dear Candice, this is specific to U.S. politics, but it relates to Canadian politics as well. Could I get your thoughts on Nick Fuentes confronting Ben Shapiro while Ben was with his wife and kids? I personally think Nick crossed the line and that political discourse in both the U.S. and Canada has reached an all-time low. This reminded me of when Trudeau was almost attacked when he marched in a climate march with his kids. When political figures of all parties are with their families, they should be left alone. Yeah, so, this is a really good question. I was watching this footage the other day of Ben Shapiro. He is walking into a hotel with his family when he is confronted by a conservative sort of political activist who had a beef with Shapiro. Here, let's play part of that clip.
Ben, it's great to see you. Why did you give a 45-minute speech about me at Stanford? And you won't even look at my
Hey, he's with his kids.
Come on, I'm right here.
I'll just say that, Ben Shapiro handled this like a pro. He obviously showed a lot of self-control to ignore this kind of heckling that was happening. And, I have a kid as well. I have family. And the idea of someone confronting you in an aggressive, negative way when you're with your kids is just completely out of line. It's completely offside, in my opinion. When someone's with their family, they should be left alone. I've been confronted a couple times, many times, just, when I'm visiting Calgary or Edmonton, sometimes in Toronto, sometimes in Vancouver, someone will recognize me and come up to it. Fortunately for me, it's always sort of been a positive encounter. People negatively if they see me and they have a negative feeling about me, fortunately, they've left me alone. But I can't imagine having that kind of confrontation when you're with your family. And I think that this activist who confronted him really lost a lot of his support because no one likes to see that. And the same thing goes, whether it's Andrew Scheer with his children, Justin Trudeau, I think that families should be left alone and should be left out of the political debate. And I'll just say one more thing, especially for Ben Shapiro, because Ben Shapiro is not only an outspoken conservative, a very effective communicator, but he's also an Orthodox Jew who stands up to the far right, to the sort of white supremacist fringe on the far right. And because of that, he gets a lot of death threats. He get a lot of threats. My understanding is that he has security detail. Now, he's a political commentator, he's a podcast host, and yet he has to have round-the-clock security because of the amount of threats that he gets. So again, another reason why people should just be left alone when they're with their family. All right, next question. What do you think is the biggest international threat to Canada? Many would argue Russia or China or even Islamist terrorism. What do you think? Well, it's kind of interesting because, Canada isn't really a big global player, so we don't really have threats in the same way that the United States is. I think that whatever is a threat to the United States is a threat to Canada. So all of those examples that were listed are threats. I think that there's a real concern that in 50 or 100 years, China's economy will be much, much bigger than the United States, and they'll be able to assert so much more power around the world. So, right now we sort of have this peaceful, liberal global order that's based on the United States being the dominant superpower, basically the only superpower. And a lot of people hate the United States for that. But if you step back and you consider what the alternatives are, imagine if the world's biggest global superpower was a corrupt, human rights abusing communist dictatorship. And instead of the US spreading sort of goodwill around the world and promoting peace and democracy and free markets, you had a global menace promoting communism and authoritarian regime around the world. I think that we would live in a very different kind of world. That's the concern with China. But look, here's what I will say about Canada. The biggest threat, I believe, to Canada and the future of our survival as a country is our ability to stay united. So I would say that all of these are a threat insofar as Canada is open to being manipulated by, right now, mass immigration, people coming to Canada with no expectation that they adopt any kind of Canadian values, identity, join the community, learn our local languages, that people are just allowed to come and settle and kind of create their own closed communities. So that could be any of those groups. That could be a closed Islamist community where they believe in Sharia law and promote a jihadist ideology. It could be a closed community of people loyal to the Chinese communist government, or any number of other communities, but people coming here, not becoming Canadian, and instead bringing their sort of values and tribal hatreds or their ideology that's counter to our free and democratic society to Canada. And what will that look like 50 to 100 years from now if we have all these little close communities? I think Canada will be a society at war with itself, and it won't be strong enough to sort of stay united and fight against any external threats that could happen at that time. So that would be my fear of the biggest threat to Canada. Next question, this is a good one. There has been so much talk about impeachment here in Canada, but I really don't think the media or the average Canadian understands what's going on in the States. Can you clarify to your viewers what this is actually about? Newsflash to Canadians, Donald Trump is still president of the United States. So I have to be honest, I haven't really been watching much of the Canadian coverage of this just because it's so mind-numbing and I don't think it's very fair or accurate. So impeachment is an accusation. Impeachment isn't a ruling. It isn't something that is finalized. It's basically the House in the United States. There's two houses. There's the House of Representatives, and then there's also the Senate. So the House are the people that can impeach a president, and impeachment, again, is just an accusation. So because the Democrats control the House, they have accused Donald Trump. And then in order for him to actually get removed from office, it would have to get confirmed by the Senate. Well, the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, and so it's not going to happen, just as it didn't happen under Bill Clinton when he was impeached. So just because someone's impeached doesn't mean they're removed from office. That would have to require the Senate confirmation. The Senate is not going to impeach Donald Trump, so he's going to remain president. Now, this is all just a political show, essentially. It's like so much in Washington, it's political theater. It doesn't really have any kind of impact. If you look at the polling and the data in the United States between Democrats and Republicans, you'll see a nation that's very, very divided. Most Democrats want Trump removed. They want him impeached. Most Republicans don't. Even when you look at independents, the split is almost down the middle. 47% of independents want Trump removed from office. 46% want him to remain in office and let the voters decide in November 2020 election. So again, just because someone's impeached doesn't mean they're removed from office. And I think this does set a bit of a dangerous precedent. I know it happened under Bill Clinton with Republicans doing the impeachment, but essentially what you can have is anytime there's a president who is from an opposite party of the party that controls the House, the president can be impeached. So I think what we'll see in the future as the country remains very divided and a very stark partisan divide is that when there's a Republican-controlled House and a Democrat president, that president will get impeached. When there's a Democrat-controlled House, as there is right now, and a Republican president, that president will get impeached. It really doesn't really mean much. Okay, let's move on. Okay, Candice, I have a question. It's about the TMX pipeline and the economics of the project. I would like to know what the financing arrangements are for the construction. We all know the feds paid $4.5 billion for ownership of the present line, including presumably the Kinder Morgan cost to the point of the expansion preparations. Now the line is in construction phase, incurring and paying presumably costs. Normally such a big project requires contractual commitments for borrowing or otherwise providing the construction phase. That commitment normally is made on an agreed upon, settled basis of repayment or borrowed funds, along with a financial plan for the investor of the distribution and or handling of profit or loss. In the TMX case, we, the public, are the investors. I hope the government has a business plan. I haven't heard or seen a word of this. If this information is available somewhere, my engineering curiosity would like to see it. Can you help? Regards, Bob. Well, thank you for the question, Bob. So this is a pretty complicated question. I've looked at it a while and I can't actually find any contractual commitments for the borrowing on any basis. But basically this is what the Finance Department says. It is not, however, the intention of the Government of Canada to be a long-term owner of this project. At the appropriate time, Canada will work with investors to transfer the project and related assets to a new owner or owners in a way that ensures the project's construction and operation will proceed in a manner that protects the public interest. Many investors have already expressed interest in the project, including Indigenous groups, Canadian pension funds, and others. Basically what happens is the $4.5 billion went to just what was the existing cost of the pipeline and what had been done to that point. Now that the pipeline is now back in the construction phase, it is the federal government, aka funded by Canadian taxpayers. That's the money that's going to be invested into building the actual pipeline. So the $4.5 billion was just the very baseline, the very start. We're continuing to fund it, and the Government of Canada still has this pipe dream that they are going to be able to eventually sell the pipeline to a private investor. I wouldn't hold my breath on that. The whole reason why the federal government had to purchase this pipeline in the first place was because the private sector wasn't really interested in doing it anymore, given the lack of certainty about the future of pipelines and the oil industry in Canada. So that information was all available just through the finance minister's website over in the Government of Canada. So the idea is basically that the Government of Canada is going to be able to find a private investor. I wouldn't hold my breath about that, given the fact that the government had to buy this pipeline in the first place because the private sector was no longer interested in holding such a project, given the grave uncertainty about the future of pipelines and the oil industry in Canada. So I think that's going to be a long-term boondoggle that we will keep an eye on. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for everyone who submitted questions. And again, if you would like to be part of the Ask Me Anything, sign up for one of our clubs and you can send a question over and I will read it on air. Thank you very much, and we will be back next week. Thank you.